I think we've got everybody in the room, so we can start. Welcome to Savoy Place. It's a good turnout tonight. After all, I thought it was just going to be me and Mark, considering the Arctic weather and the RMT national race strike. I guess we had a little help from the French national football team. If it wasn't that intervention, we'd be competing with a World Cup semi-final. It wasn't to be. So I hope you all had a chance to sample the sandwiches and refreshments upstairs in the Riverside room, so you can sit back now and enjoy the presentation. If you haven't managed to have some, you now know to turn up a little bit earlier. So I'm sure there'll be some left for later. It's been a while since I last hosted an event here, about 2.5 years since the start of COVID. So I do hope it all comes back to me. I've made some notes, as you can see. So first, I'll introduce myself for those of you that are new to our group and our events here. My name is Xenophon Christodoulou. I'm the chairman of the IET London Network, and I'll be the host for today, alongside a number of volunteers that are here helping me. Presentation tonight is part of a series of monthly Prestige lectures. We call them Prestige lectures since 2004. These are held every second Wednesday evening of the month. And over COVID restrictions period, these were mostly delivered as webinars. As from January next year, we're going back, I'm pleased to say, to in-person events here at Savoy Place on a regular basis. So I should say that the London network of the IET is formed by 5 geographical sections and a young professionals network. Each one is run by their own committee. They've got their own budget and they run their own events. These are at Hammersmith, Harrow, Teddington, East London, and here at Savoy Place, we've got the central section and the London Young Professionals. So the aim of the local network, through the lectures that we organize and technical visits, and this is straight out of the IET website, is to inspire, inform and influence the global engineering community, supporting technology innovation to meet the needs of modern society. And hence, that's why we invited Matt here, particularly on the needs of the modern society. So if there are any of you here wondering how you can get involved, and this is the marketing pitch, and offer some of your time to assist your local committee to manage, plan, organize, and deliver these events, please talk to one of the volunteers or myself afterwards at the drinks reception. Also, if you're a newly elected fellow of the IET, you will notice upstairs we've set up a table for our committee members to meet you all and tell you a bit more about what we do. And I sent an invite to all of you. Is there any here? Show of hands? None. Right. Okay. We'll have to do better next time. So you will have noticed the IET TV crew as well. They're filming and live streaming the event. They'll be also upstairs during the drinks reception, shooting video clips for our local network promotional video. So it's everybody's opportunity to be on TV. Right, so we're also delighted and privileged to have with us tonight the newly appointed Chief Executive and Secretary of the IET, Ed Almond. So don't miss the opportunity to say hello later. He'll be up to offer the vote of thanks later. So I'm forgetting, I should go through the emergency evacuation arrangements. There's no planned fire alarm test tonight, you'll be pleased to know. So if it does sound, can I ask you to evacuate the room in an orderly fashion and follow the emergency exit signs. They're at the back and the sides of the room. And leave the building. The evacuation point is underneath Waterloo Bridge. It's quite cold out there, so don't plan to stay there for that long. We'll wait for further instructions and hopefully we'll be able to either come back or continue the conversation at the Savoy Tap up the road. We've got plenty of restrooms. I hope you managed to find them on each floor. They're all well signposted. And finally, and I'll check my phone as well, can I ask you all to put your phones on silent. Yeah. So the presentation will last approximately an hour, and then we've allocated some time for questions. If you wish to ask questions, raise your hand and one of our volunteers will pass on the microphone so you can ask your question. If you're watching the event through the live stream, please type your question in the channel and we'll try to ask the question on your behalf. So following the presentation, as I said, we've got a drinks reception in the Riverside room on the 3rd floor. As this is our Christmas event, we shall have some festive drinks and a live band from the Royal College of Music. The reception is open to everybody, so you're all welcome to join us. So tonight, we've got with us Mark Wilde, who will be sharing with us his story and critical insights from completing the Crossrail project and getting the Elizabeth line open to passenger service. Mark is the former CEO of Crossrail Limited and has over 30 years' experience leading the delivery of complex critical infrastructure. Mark has a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronic engineering and a master's in business administration. And I'm quite pleased to hear that because most of the program directors we had here, they were civil engineers. So well done, Mark. He's also a former MD of Westinghouse Signals and was CEO of Public Transport Australia, or Victoria, I should say. Before moving to Crossrail, he was the managing director of London Underground as well. So without further ado with introductions, I'd like to invite Mark to start his presentation.
Hi everybody, hello, hello, hello. So this is lots of Crossrail colleagues here. Who put your hand up if you've worked on Crossrail? Right, God, don't be careful what I say. But this is my 171st Crossrail lessons learned. 171 out tonight, because this is the last time that this is going to, I think I need a new spiel. So some of you have heard some of this before, but I've done 171 lessons learned of Crossrail. And it's really nice to do it tonight here, because as Zen said, I'm very proud to be a chartered electrical engineer. And I went to Newcastle Poly. My dad was a miner. And the reason I became an engineer is when you're a miner, the engineer of a mine is a really big deal. And my dad was literally a coal miner. And he wanted me to be something in my life. And he encouraged me to be an engineer. And my poor dad passed away a month ago after a long illness, and I'm really pleased that he got to see the Elizabeth line, and I feel very proud to be here. So to come here to the IET and present this is a real honour actually, so I'd say a big thank you. Caveat that I always give, this is my version of the truth, right? I've done 171 to tell my version of the truth, and I think there's an interesting story in Crossrail and the Elizabeth line about the importance of engineering and leadership. So I guess I'm going to give you, won't take an hour, you'll be relieved to know. Take me about 45 minutes. I'll give you my version of what happened, but there's some notable people here who would, Simon here, whose whole career has almost been on Crossrail, Simon S. So there's voices in the room that I think are quite interesting other than mine, but this is my version of the truth. And I think it really matters because I'm now back in the utility business. So the first 17 years of my career were in electricity, 22 years in railways, and I'm back running what I never thought I'd do. I'm back running SGN, who are one of Britain's gas distribution networks in Scotland and south of England. And you come back to the utility business, you realise what a monumental challenge ahead of energy in this country, whether it's hydrogen or wind power or Sizewell. Major infrastructure really matters. So I think I'd encourage you to think beyond really the very special infrastructure we built, more about what does it really mean. Here we go. So, Crossrail. You all know about Crossrail, don't you? Who doesn't know about Crossrail? Crossrail was first thought about in the 40s, the 1840s. Actually, 1840 to be precise, because I think in 1839, I might be a year out, the Liverpool-Manchester Railway was created, the world's first railway, first timetable railway, Liverpool-Manchester. And the canal companies in the Paddington Basin thought, wouldn't it be great to build an underground railway to the Tilbury docks? Because London at that time, guess what, had an air quality crisis and a congestion crisis with horse and cart. So, yeah, 1840, first time somebody thought about the Elizabeth Line. Came to prominence in 1949, the Abercrombie Report, landmark land use report in London. First drawn on the London rail map in 1974, and I think in the kind of late 80s, early 90s got some traction, but really came into prominence in kind of 1999, year 2000, when work started on what we would call the Elizabeth Line. So, 22 years of planning, design, construction, integration, and I think genuinely a monumental, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I do believe this. It's probably going to be this century's defining engineering achievement. There's no real other railway like this in the world. RER in Paris, S-Bahns in Germany were their kind of predecessors, but this railway, this infrastructure has got few peers in the world. And some interesting stats there, 90,000 new homes, and fundamentally 1.5 million people, new people within a 45-minute commute of the central activity zone. And interestingly, in the post-COVID world, in the first 6 months of the Elizabeth Line, we are at the forecast pre-COVID patronage. Now, sure, some of it's abstraction from the central line, but generally, the infrastructure we've built is attracting the customers that we expected. So the Elizabeth Line, Crossrail, a really big deal for London. But the story is, of course, how it kind of got there. So there's the iconic map. You all know what this is about. Central section, iconic central section, 42 kilometres of single bore tunnel, 20 to 30 metres underneath London, but fundamentally joining the Great Eastern and the Great Western together. So it's not a tube line, it's more than that, it's a new mode of transport. It's an underground, full-size railway underneath London, bridging the Great Western and the Great Eastern together. The French, any French people in the audience, I always feel very bad saying how great this is when the RER had this in 1977, but you can get the sense of why this is a game changer. So instead of big intercity trains coming to London termini, then you got on little trains to distribute around. This is it is a tube line, a mass transit system, but it's more than that. It's a bridge. Heathrow to Canary Wharf is now 39 minutes. So it's a nutter game changer. Interesting. It should have cost us £16 billion. It's actually cost us 20 billion in total. Should have cost 16, it's cost 20. We've done a lot of interesting work with Oxford University, the Said Business School, on major programs around the world. They looked at many, many, many major programs around the world. How many major programs in the world have been on time and on budget? And there's a very precise answer. Anybody like to guess? 0. Well done. So Crossrail at 27% over budget and time is winning. We're in the top 3. So we won. We won. Tell that to anybody else. But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting split as well, isn't it? 12 billion pounds of major civils, 2 billion pounds or more of surface, and £1 billion for the train. And deep in there, the electrical engineering, of the 20 billion, the electrical engineering might well be less than 1.5 billion. So the electrical engineering, in terms of monetarial sense, was actually quite modest. But you all know in this room, the electrical engineering, the integration was hugely dominant. And we'll kind of come back to that. Ooh. Wasn't it a great honour and privilege to see the late Queen opening in her last major event? What an amazing thing to have honoured the Queen to do this, and it's quite a special thing. And certainly I was there on the day, and when it launched at the end of May, the whole city was painted purple. I think Canary Wharf, they're great people, Canary Wharf. The best event I thought on the opening was something called Canary Woof, where they got 20 corgis and dyed them purple. I don't know how appropriate that was, but it was the cleverest bit, Canary Woof. But yeah, the whole city lit up. Everybody forgets about it now. Who's travelled on it? Do you like it? Yeah. It should be after £20 billion, but everybody's kind of forgetting the story now. And I guess what I'd like to unpack in my presentation is how it evolved, why it got into some trouble, and how it got out of that trouble and delivered what I think is genuinely the most amazing experience. I mean, the thing you might notice on the Elizabeth line is the incredible ride. And I was talking to somebody earlier, a namesake of mine, who is describing, if you look at the train when it's empty, which fortunately isn't very often, but if you do, you'll notice it's snaking, and it's the most amazing ride mostly on a semi-resilient track formation. You know, we are, I forget the stats, Simon, but something like in the delivery development agreement, we can only increase ambient noise by like 5 decibels. I think in the Barbican Theatre, we had to cause no noise, even though we go within about 5 or 6 meters. The whole thing's encased in rubber. It is the most astonishing railway job. I mean, truly, there is not a better railway in the world, before you even talk about the technology that kind of got there. If you stand on our platforms, you can have a conversation. Why can you have a conversation? Because they are acoustically perfect. I came through Bond Street yesterday with a friend, and I was looking at the amazing bronze kind of cladding and the architectural outcome. It is genuinely a world-class job and a complete icon. So, we must, as engineers though, and project managers and leaders, unpack what really happened. So let's just talk about that. It would be good to get somebody to blame for what happened, wouldn't it? And this bloke would be a good one. And so I'm going to give you my side of the story. And please feel free, anybody who was there at the same time, ask me a question later about it. But it would be useful to find somebody to blame. But I think the issues of Crossrail, its challenges and its successes, need to be thought as systemic rather than individual people. And this is Boris in 2009 with Andrew Adonis. You can see Boris is wearing some kind of a life raft. He came on a boat that day, I think, in a great fanfare, and they launched the diggers were started. I could do a Boris impersonation, but I won't, but you can imagine it. Let the diggers start, rev up the diggers. And they started building the cofferdam in Canary Wharf, Langerock, I think, job. And of course that was a great thing to do. A lot of people kind of blame the politicians about Crossrail's woes. The politicians wanted too much. The truth is, politicians will only really respond to what the technocrats and bureaucrats will tell them. And it was the right thing to do to start building Canary Wharf, get some momentum behind the project. Unfortunately, Canary Wharf Group, who built the station, had to start without any baseline of standards that I could see. And what they built, they did a reasonable job, but they didn't build a railway station. In the absence of standards, they built something that was more akin to the retail estate of Canary Wharf. And we went back many years later to refit it. So I think there's a story there about really, you need the political advocacy, but politicians rely on us to be truthful. And I don't mean anybody was untruthful or deceitful. It's more about the truth and reality of what can be done. So yes, Canary Wharf should have started to be built, but it should never have been started, the electrical engineering, without the baseline standards forming, which happened somewhat later. And it's one of the most profound stories of Crossrail is the importance of design. So as much as I'd like to blame Boris, I don't think that would be fair. In fact, he was one of the really great supporters of the program. I love Tony Meggs, my chair that I had on Crossrail, and I love his kind of his statement. The Crossrail was the greatest program in the world until it wasn't. And I think we have to really think about why did that occur. Now this is revisionist history from me, looking back. And first thing I'd say is I'm one of 75,000 people that worked on Crossrail, and really, genuinely, that Newton's saying about standing on the shoulders of giants Genuinely, the work done before I was chief executive is utterly stellar and brilliant. Mott MacDonald Neil, amongst many world-class organisations that were just brilliant. So anything I'm going to say isn't meant to disrespect the past. I'm in awe of it. But it is important to unpack, how did the world's greatest project become a pariah to then become the world's greatest project again? And I think it's an interesting story. And fundamentally, Crossrail to me, for all you program managers in the room, Crossrail broke 2 rules. They see all these paintings, they're all unfortunately old men, aren't they? But all these people, the railway gods, have given 2 rules that Crossrail decided to break. First rule broken. This is 2014, David Cameron announcing the end of civil engineering. He looks like a giant in that picture. I don't know quite what's going on, but David Cameron looks like 10 foot tall. But in 2014, the major civil engineering finished, and the project declared 50% complete. And I believe this is a really profound lesson. It wasn't 50% complete, it was a third complete. Because Crossrail thought about it, this is my revisionist history, but if you do look at the programs of that time, there was a civil engineering effort followed by what you might term the electrical engineering effort, 50-50. This is 2014, 4 years before the opening in 2018. And construction had been going 4 years. So we're at the halfway point in time, and it was declared we were at the halfway point of the railway. Really disastrous thinking, really, because all of these projects are always 3 things: civil engineering, electrical engineering, and integration. And in Crossrail's sense, because of the immensity of the technical challenge that we'll come to, it was pretty much a third, a third, a third. So if anybody tells you it's 50-50 mark, they're completely wrong. Now, I'm not saying HS2 or East-West Rail will be third, but it's never going to be 50-50-0. Yeah? It might be 45-45-10. But there must be time given for the integration of these assets to something that is actually a railway. So I think, the first rule broken by Crossrail was they thought they were halfway there in 2014, and they weren't. They were a third of the way there. There's quite an interesting lesson about what you measure. I'll come back to the second rule they broke later. This is 2016. This is March the 23rd, 2016. Why do I know this date? Well, you see Boris is there with Mike and Terry. I know this because in the afternoon I had an interview with Boris Johnson to be the managing director of London Underground. I was in Australia, in Melbourne, and I came to London, and on that day, in the afternoon, I met Boris for an interview, and I got the job. He never asked me many questions. Maybe that's why I got the job, But I hope not. But he was, to be fair to Boris and Mike and Terry at that time, this is 2.5 years from the end, and a decision was made to name Crossrail the Elizabeth Line. One, I think we'd all agree now, has transpired to be a great decision. And there's the Queen at that moment in Bond Street receiving. Now you might notice something obvious here. This is a Bond Street, and you might note that Bond Street isn't built yet, which might be a bit of a problem, right? But this is 2.5 years before the end, and this is why I think Crossrail's interesting. As much as conspiracy theorists would like to say it, there's no big conspiracy here. This is a project that really believed in March 16, with 2.5 years to go, that it could be done. You do not name the Elizabeth Line and get the monarch to open it unless you're very, very confident. And of course, at that point, in March 16, the cracks were already in the programme. But people really believed it could be done. July 18, with 6 months to go, the project had pretty much worked out that the programme that it had couldn't really come together in 6 months. Project at that time thought that they needed another 6 months on top of the 6 months that they had to go. There was a problem. This was quite a big shock. So another lesson of Crossrail. the communication of it was really big surprise. A surprise to politicians, a surprise to the media, not so much a surprise within the project, because everybody knew cracks were there, but this was a big, it says there, that's the Evening Standard headline, big embarrassment for mayor and ministers. So, this is a big deal. I was on the board. I can't say I'm blameless in this. I was on the board for 2 years. I was running the Tube, and I was on the board of Crossrail. So I think first thing I'd say is I look back and there's things I could have done better that I've learned now that I wouldn't do again. So I'm not saying I wasn't part of the problem, which maybe is why my story has some validity. The worst headline, so I was asked to take over the project. The worst headline is I got hauled in front of the Public Accounts Committee and I had to admit I didn't know how to finish the job. And it was clearly a big problem. We didn't know, the program couldn't come together. The program had become discontinuous. It was open loop. There was no way of finishing the job. One of the most astonishing days of my career, we got a new technical director, a guy called Colin Brown, very notable in integration, and I asked Colin to go and work out what do we have left to do? And the most astonishing statistic is there were 75,000 things missing from our program that were in contractors' programs. 75,000 bits missing. They were in Balfour Beatty's program, Costain's program, Mott MacDonald's program. 75,000 things had got lost down the back of the sofa, and they weren't in our program. How could that possibly happen? There was a black hole in the middle of the program. How could that occur on the world's greatest program? And I think I'd invite you into a mindset of thinking systemically about this, rather than thinking some people messed up. I'm sure maybe it's in 75,000 people. Some people could have done better. But generally, this is a systemic failure that I think is really important to kind of understand. And I'd just like to spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes unpacking why I thought the program got into this. And I think it really matters when the government is so stretched at the moment, isn't it, with the country's finances. It doesn't really matter which political party you favour. There's no doubt we are in quite a difficult situation with money in this country. So why would politicians back us? Why would they back the engineers and project people, and when they're on a quest to certainty? So I think learning the Crossrail lessons and systemizing them in the future is actually quite an important thing. Right, what I think happened. Crossrail was always two programs. It was always major civil engineering, and it was always probably the world's most advanced digital railway. So there was always two projects. And to be absolutely fair, if you look at the history, from the sponsors' requirements to the Act, to the development agreement, to the risk registers when it started, this was always recognised. The issue is, for me, that the civil engineering side lived what I would term to be in the house of intervention. There was no choice for Andy Mitchell, who I think did an absolutely superb job. There was no choice for Andy and his team at that moment to intervene. They had to intervene because we put 42 kilometres of tunnelling. The Connaught Tunnel was refurbished. This is the most incredible civil engineering, amazing civil engineering achievement. We kind of if you go into Tottenham Court Road, you'll see it's got a curved platform. It's curved because we snake past centre points foundations. We go quite close to the central line. It's the most incredible job. London might be the most difficult city to do this in. 2,000 years of archaeology, big skyscrapers, and a labyrinthine deep tube. Now those conditions don't exist in any other country in the world. Maybe Paris, but not to the same extent with the size of high-rise. You think of Paris compared to London, and you think, well, how much more difficult London is. So the left-hand side, I think the civil engineers did a superb job. But since the Pharaohs, the civil engineers have always had the money and the ability to intervene. I think the real issue is on the right-hand side. And on the right-hand side, if the civil engineers lived in the house of intervention, I think at that time the railway engineers, the electrical engineers, the signalling engineers lived what I term as the house of risk. What's the difference? Well, civil engineers had to intervene. They had to do the grouting, the deflection monitoring of the big skyscrapers. They had to intervene in ground conditions as they found them. On the right-hand side, of course, the integration is happening many years in advance, and you can write risk mitigation that you will get to at some point. And I think one of the big lessons of Crossrail is definitely on the right-hand side, there should have been more of an interventionist approach at the beginning. Easy for me to say, but when I was in Westinghouse, I was running Westinghouse, and our first proposal for the signalling system in the middle was ETCS level 2 with ATO dealing with a platform screen door. It had never been done anywhere in the world, but we knew we could do it. But a decision was made instead to put CBTC in the middle, kind of the variant that you might see in the Jubilee line or the Northern line or somewhere in Singapore, and then end up basically bridging CBTC to the Network Rail world, which, as we all know, would have TPWS, ATP, it would have the future ETCS. So a decision was made to really forward sell the risk of integration into the future rather than intervening in it immediately. Now, I'm not criticizing anybody because it's quite a rational decision about why we ended up with 3 signalling systems. When you look back though, and you add to it that Bombardier won the train contract and they had to produce a prototype train, the Adventure platform, you realize, wow, 3 signalling systems on a new train platform probably tripled the complexity. A better decision would have been ETCS level 2 all the way through end to end. Sure, it had never had ATO on it, but we had it in the lab, we could have done it. And it never dealt with a platform screen door, but that wasn't the most complex interface. The more complex interface was CBTC to TPWS than to ETCS. So I guess the big picture is for engineers to think. It's okay to kind of think about the future and write a mitigation that somebody else might have to solve. It takes more courage and thoughtfulness to intervene at the beginning. And I really do think the civil engineers have it right because they're forced to intervene. We need to think about, on the right-hand side, a more interventionist at the beginning. And we'll come back to the conditions that could be created for that. I'll save you reading 1,000 pages of NAO and IPA and PAC reports, but you might ask, well, what on earth went wrong in July 18? And bullets 2 and 4 are probably the thing to know. So in July 18, bullet number 2, the future was greatly underestimated. So things that were estimated to take a month have actually taken us a year to do. So the future was excessively optimism bias. Also in July 18, bullet point number 4, where the project was actually not where it thought it was. It thought it was 95% complete. It was actually 60% complete. There was 75,000 things missing. So project had 2 problems in July 18. It was greatly underestimating what would happen in the future, massive optimism bias, and it also didn't understand where it was, huge confirmation bias. So you might term the psychology of projects was really 2 things were happening, both of them adverse at the same time, which had like a multiplying effect. And you remember I said that the 2 rules from the railway gods were broken. The first one is it was never 50-50, it was 30-30-30. The other problem was that measure of 95% complete in July 18, it was actually mathematically correct, but it was based on physical quantity. Cubes of concrete, wires pulled in. It was actually correct. 95% of the infrastructure did exist. We talked about this today, Phil, didn't we? Second rule that the railway gods gave us that was broken. the last 5% of every project will take 20% of the time. So if you're a young engineer here, just remember that, right? Physically, you might be 95% complete, but the last 5% will take 20% of the time. And in Crossrail in 2018, the last 5% was being estimated to take 5% of the time. A big distortion of reality. So, there's some, you might ask, well, how on earth could, George Stephenson's rules of railway be broken by what was really a very capable team? How could Mark Wilde, the great Mark Wilde, sitting on the board of Crossrail, how could Mark Wilde miss it? And I think about it a lot. I was talking to Phil Gaffney at an event earlier in the week, and Phil and I, a lot of you will know Phil Gaffney, he built MTR. How did me and Phil miss it? And I think that's just worth unpacking. Here's a model for you that I think is really, if you wanted to take one thing away into your practice as engineers and project managers, I'll offer you a model. 2x2 grid. On the bottom, ambition. On the vertical, reality. Not your perception of reality, the deterministic reality. Yeah, 75,000 things missing. I think what happened in 2014, when David Cameron said the civil engineering is complete, I think there was a state of high reality at that point in the program. I think it was a well-run program. I think Andy Mitchell and everybody did a superb job, and I think they knew where they were. They were highly ambitious. There are 4 years to go, but there was a high degree of reality. There was even a program on the table, I think, around that time that showed we might be under significant pressure. For some reason, between 2014 and 2017, the program retained its ambition. 9th of December 2018, it lost its collective reality. So 2014 to 17 is an interesting case study where the ambition was retained, but the collective reality was lost by a big group of people. 2018, you don't want to be there where you've got no reality and no ambition. And I think the truth is, I spent a whole year with my new team in 2019 trying to work out what we God almighty, there's 75,000 things missing, and we really didn't get on. And only really when Jim Crawford joined, we powered in, and I think we finished the project really top class. I think the catalyzing event for this journey was the singular fixed end date, which I think was defined many years in advance. I've looked at pretty much every major program in the world, by the way, that you could look at in the past 2 years. Nobody is daft enough now to name a singular end date 6 years in advance. And I think the catalyzing event is people not wanting to let the air out of the system. The fear that if you lost the impetus of the internal date, the whole thing would unwind. Not an unreasonable idea. The truth is, though, it was never going to be a singular end date, was it? It was always going to be uncertain. And for some reason, I think it's a real story about engineering leadership, for some reason, in that descent to unreality, the engineers were overridden by the project managers. So a profound lesson of Crossrail is the utter importance of the profession of engineering, and how engineering has to have primacy over what needs to be done and how it will be done. And the minute you end up with project managers overriding what the engineer might say, you get a lot of trouble. Now, that isn't all the project manager's fault. And I guess one of the things I would say to the IET, to the ICE, to the Royal Academy would be the strength of our profession as being people that could be trusted to speak truth to power, but be ambitious as well. And I guess the model I'd kind of leave you with at this point is, I think high performance is a combination of really strong ambition, but 2 feet in reality. Because the minute you end up in the red, highly ambitious but utterly unrealistic, strange things happen to human psychology. So you've got to keep it in the green. And the art of major program management to me is that top right-hand corner. Highly ambitious, but highly realistic. Easy words to say, quite hard to do. I'll give you I think Crossrail's story on modularity is really quite exceptional. In the Learning Legacy, you will find a lot on this, and a huge amount was done. It's one of the benchmark projects in the world, actually. I think we're the first major program to use LED lighting. Our work on sustainability is just incredible. That left-hand picture is from, I think it's somewhere in East London, like a mock-up of what the stations look like. A kit of parts was developed. Exceptional work. For some reason, though, we ended up on the right-hand side, which is kind of quite interesting. This is the Barbican corner of Farringdon. Anybody like to say what's wrong with this picture? So this gate is like, oh dear me, every time I've been there, there's 5 people with orange jackets working on it. It's a £2 million motorised gate. And the reason it's there, and it's not like a Bostwick gate, is clearly the oversight development, this corner, the design of it has got out of synchronism with the principles of modularity. And I think that happened, I'm sure Chris Binns would speak about this better than me, around 2015, 2016, the client design was running late. And decisions were made, not just this one, to start to fit things on site before the client design, we'd got to the bottom of the V. You know, before we got to the final design overview. So again, another profound lesson is you'd be better waiting 6 months, even if you've got 5,000 people non-productive on site. Design is all. And on Crossrail, the utter push to the unrealistic end date, strange decisions were made about fitting on site, and we lost what was actually a very, very beautiful and world-leading approach to modularity. Future mega programs will be built in factories, and they will be brought to site and plugged in. The minute you end up with 10,000 people 30 metres underneath London, you can imagine what the problems would occur. Modularity, of course, is a quest to simplify. There's a real skill in simplification, and I think if there's any younger engineers in the room or watching, if I were a younger engineer and again, I would get into modularity, simplicity, how do you decomplexify things. But there were some things on Crossrail that were naturally complex. 3 signalling systems. You know, the integration of these stations alongside these existing London Underground stations. And my belief is, a lesson you might want to take away, is as complexity increases, so does the need for the internal guiding mind to coordinate. And at the end of the day, as Tony Meggs often says, projects are an act of will. And that will, I believe, isn't in machismo and hero, it's in coordination and alignment. And my best example of this is fire engineering. Towards the end of getting the integration done, there's a company called Protec, a brilliant company called Protec that had 50 fire engineers from London. And they were pretty much the total complement of engineers that can sign off London Underground fire, apart from the people in London Underground. And these 50 engineers from Protec were working for maybe 12 different tier 1 suppliers, invisible to us. So one thing that Jim Crawford did that I thought was brilliant, we brought Protec into us, and we said to the stations when you're going to get the Protec engineers, which obviously created commercial claims with the stations that were at the end of the queue. But productivity went from something like 10, 11% to 90%. And fire engineering was one of the big critical paths of the integration, because there's only 50 engineers doing this enormous amount of integration. So that's an example of coordination as complexity increases. Crossrail spent a long time in this bottom right-hand corner, assuming the supply chain would pull itself together, including in the signalling system. We had the best. We had Knorr-Bremse doing the door, Bombardier doing the train, we had Siemens doing the signalling. Had the very best. And not for want of trying, we couldn't get the signalling together with the train control. We ended up, in the last year, a weekly meeting with Michael Peter, the CEO of Siemens, an organization of 750,000 people, and Danny DePerna, the CEO of Alstom. We ended up in a weekly meeting with them, directly coordinating. And that level of coordination was because we were really at the top right-hand corner. We were at the most extreme complexity. You definitely don't want to be in the top left-hand corner coordinating very simple stuff, hence back to modularity. So I think if one of these lessons of the future of major programs, they will be really good at simplification, but the residual complexity will be highly coordinated. And I personally think when people talk about system integration, and they talk too much about software, system integration is really the art of coordination. And I think if I was a young engineer, if I was evolving into this space, I would think a lot about the art of coordination in terms of engineering, not just the actual digitization, which is kind of interesting, but it's not really where the main game is. Just a couple of other perspectives before we close. There's Crossrail structure. It was a 50-50 joint venture between the UK government and London. It had a board, a delivery authority. It had an executive team, and of course it had program governance. People could talk all day about was Crossrail structured right. I think it was structured fine. It was a structure. It was well defined. The sponsors' requirements written at the beginning have pretty much come to pass at the end. It also had from the outside the classic 4 layers of assurance. So from the outside, this looked very, very solid. The people in the left-hand side were some of the world's best. The Crossrail people, Bechtel, Jacobs, C.H. Hill. And on the right-hand side, we had really superb assurance. Turner Townsend, Oricon, AECOM, a lot of the big hitters were there. The problem was, why on earth did this structure not spot the fact that we had 75,000 things missing? And I think fundamentally, it was the right structure without the right mindset. And I think we do need to talk about the structure of teams and how they work. I know diversity and inclusion might be a topic when I say it, might even turn people off because it's become so ubiquitous in the language, quite rightly, from moral and human point of view. I raise diversity and inclusion as a point here because if Crossrail had been more diverse and inclusive, they might have had more curiosity about what was happening. I think what happened in Crossrail and in the board that I was part of, we formed groupthink, confirmation bias, which happens with all homogeneous groups, whether it's a lot of white men in their 50s with civil engineering bias, or it's a lot of black women in their 30s who are psychologists dealing with a certain non-physical problem, like a psychological problem. Groupthink occurs with homogeneity, and I think in Crossrail it was too homogeneous. And I really would implore all future big programs, the key to solve this problem, the key to get curiosity is to increase inclusivity and diversity of thought. And I don't just mean gender, I don't just mean ethnicity, I mean age. It takes all the talents to review something that is so complex. And the thing missing, why 75,000 things were lost, was purely a groupthink mindset. And the mindset was, it cannot be true. And things started to become less curious, more opaque, and when that happens, you could be the best assurer in the world, but something so big as Crossrail, you'd never find it. Final slide for me, actually. So we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the rules of the railway gods being broken, 50-50 instead of 30-30-30. The last 5% taking 5% of the time instead of, we all know, 20% of the time. We've talked about the project team not having curiosity. We've talked about the lack of coordination of complexity. But for me, people often ask me, what is your one thing, Mark? And this is it. I graduated in the mid 80s, and when I grew up, it was about Egan and Latham, about collaborative environments, alliancing, quite profound stuff at that time. I think something shifted now with mega programs, that we need to go beyond collaboration. Crossrail thought it was in a very collaborative environment. I'll offer you a model that collaboration is necessary but not sufficient to deliver something as big as Crossrail. Collaboration is a subset of this group knowing the intersectionality and dependency with people in the room and working with them. I'm going to talk about the whole of this room, not just a subset of it. And the two things are two sides of one coin. Firstly, transparency is all. Truth to power. An environment must be created where the whole is transparent, even if it's bad news. Crossrail was the classic watermelon project. Green on the outside, red on the inside. The environment must be created that as the pressure comes on, it becomes more transparent. In Crossrail, systemically, nobody to blame, as the pressure came on, it became more opaque. So left-hand side, the environment must be created for extreme transparency to create truth for power. If you did get that, which by the way takes a lot of effort, the other side of the coin, I'm going to offer you a model beyond collaboration and something that we've termed owning the whole. And the whole of Crossrail was a world-class railway carrying 200 million people, operated by 2,000 brilliant women and men. Crossrail was worth the wait. If you go back to pre-18, it was seen more as a baton race between the delivery team sprinting and putting the baton in the hand of the operators who'd sprint off. I've come to realize that's kind of for the birds. This was never a baton race. It was a Tough Mudder obstacle course where we all had to cross the line together. The railway was the thing we aspired to, not the beautiful engineering or the driver training. The whole, the purpose, was not identified early enough in Crossrail. Before 2018, the purpose of Crossrail was routinely on time, on budget, world class. I think we all realize now it should have been Crossrail will be worth the wait. Yeah? And it takes courage to get into that mindset. So for me, the step beyond Egan and Latham is to something about owning the whole. And that means transparency, that means something about the higher purpose. Now, to create this means an obvious thing. It means that fear of failure must be removed. Because if fear exists, human nature is to become compartmentalized and opaque. The fear of failure must be removed. In fact, you might argue to fail is a necessary journey to success. And I think you engineers, I consider as an engineer still, we've got to create an environment where we are able to innovate, to flex, and to fail. And I think the project management community have to kind of fit in with that. The idea of just telling engineers to get it done clearly doesn't work. And I guess my very final slide to leave you with is, I'm often asked about, okay, what are the attributes of a leader, a project manager? And I guess I've written 5 things down. I challenge all of you, I'm sure you all work in some degree in infrastructure, have a great interest in it. First one, the purpose is everything. Human beings in great endeavors will become purposeful. It's not about civil engineering, it's not even about electrical engineering, it's about the higher purpose of something that's great for society. Second one, don't stay too long in the house of risk. This idea about writing a risk mitigation, ever fantastical, hockey sticks, that somebody else will solve. Better to intervene now. But to intervene now means you've got to remove failure and blame from the environment. A kind and inclusive environment that speaks truth to power, essential. I like using the word kind. Kindness is one of the greatest attributes of engineering, because in the endeavor we're on, it's really, really hard. So what you need to do is create project teams and environments where transparency can flourish and people can speak truth to power. These are easy words to say It's really quite tough and hard to create a kind, inclusive environment. But I've come to believe that the teams that deliver these projects have to be engineered as much as we spend engineering the actual infrastructure. Remove the fear of failure. And I guess my final one that I'll leave you on is a group of people, and we all know how important major programs are. I think it's going to take all of us. I mean, what an incredible challenge we face in front of us. Financially, net zero, resilience, Putin's war in Ukraine. What a terribly uncertain period we face as human beings. But what an opportunity as engineers to shape the future. I think we are utterly at the start of a new industrial revolution, and I think we can be instrumental in that. But let's kind of all lead by commitment and not just by personality and ego. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. We are going to take a few questions now. Who wants to have a go first? One over there.
So the question from here was, is my microphone on? Oh, it's on. My microphone's on. The question is about HS2's harvesting of our lessons. The program, you'll be reassured to know, the program that's taken most interest in our lessons learned is Mark, Chris and Tim, everybody at HS2. They've picked all of our lessons. Jim Crawford's done extensive, Binzi have done loads of lessons with them. They've picked all our ideas of the integration facility. The most obvious thing in HS2 is they've identified the minimum viable product. You know, they're going to start on the greenfield section first before they integrate to the classic network. I think they've taken all the lessons, but they're getting right into the meat of it now. And I saw Mark on Monday night at an event. They're really up for this, you know, but there's no doubting. You know, HS2 is so big. Crossrail used to be the biggest project in Europe and the fourth biggest in the world. Crossrail now wouldn't get in the top 3 in Europe, wouldn't get in the top 10 in the world. So HS2, I think the challenge for Mark will be keeping the transparency to what's happening in such a big thing. But I think they've really taken it seriously, but there's no doubt they're coming to quite a challenging time. They're getting right to that point of, do you start fitting stuff even though the design's still baking? And knowing Mark, I think he'll do an absolutely tremendous job. It's a brilliant project, HS2. It's I'm in awe of it. It's brilliant, but they've taken it very seriously, to answer your question.
Thank you, Mark. Next.
I'll go and I'll ask a question. This is a really, really stupid question. It doesn't come from an engineer. It comes from a passenger. I think I know the answer, but who better to ask than you? What's the question? The question is, tell me, why are there no lavatories on the... And, before you go answer that, I'm sure I know the answer, and no main sockets to charge your phone? Go.
I love that question. I've never been asked the second one. I've been asked the first one a lot. I think it's quite an omission. I can say this because I've left. I think it's quite an omission for me. Tell me, Simon, when was that? Was that ever in the scope? Was it toilets ever in the scope?
It was always considered to be like an underground.
Yeah, always considered to be a tube. There is a plan. We did scope up, I think, at 5 of the stations to put toilets in. I don't know where that's got to. I think it's actually quite an omission, personally. But I think, you know, it's kind of a gap. It's a mistake that I think, personally. You can imagine why. Because if you put a toilet in, you end up with more staff, blah, blah, blah. But from the ambience and the customer, why there's no toilets on the train is a good choice, because if we put toilets on the train, you'd have no end of trouble. So there's no toilets on the train as a deliberate engineering compromise. The toilets in stations is a mistake. Why aren't there any sockets? Well, it's again, I guess we don't want people plugging things in, do we, and having trailing leads. But yeah, maybe it's the railway of the future would have USB things for people to plug in. But generally, it's a security thing, really. We don't want anybody plugging anything in. When I was running the tube, I saw some very extreme things done with people bringing things into the tube. And given half a chance, God knows what could happen if you had a socket down at platform level. I think the toilets is a really good tip. What do people think? Do you think we should have toilets in stations? No, never in the requirements, really. Did we? Well, I think that sounds like it was a good answer, but it was never in the requirements. And it wouldn't have been cost that much, would it? And if you go to somewhere, we go to some Network Rail stations now, they're actually quite good, aren't they, the toilets? They've kind of really upped their game. But obviously, if you have toilets, you need more staff. And London Underground stations are kind of designed a bit more automated. Good question, that.
Yeah, and a good business opportunity for somebody for USB charge bunks at the station.
That's a good idea, yeah.
I can see Harry over there thinking about it. Right, next
Mark,
question.
before I had the pleasure of working on Crossrail for 10 years on the design of the Central London stations, the standardisation programme, I had the pleasure of talking to Johnny Ive through a Foreign Office event. I said, how do you design with a group of people for the world's most expensive company with the products? And he said, we just have a room of 20 people and we all work together in a coordinated and integrated way. On average, over the whole Crossrail programme, my team and the collective team was 40 people per year. Can you tell me, or your thoughts or senses, on the value of standardisation? And I mean standardisation, not modularity, is quite different. And what you think, in retrospect, should have been the focus with the quantities of people to do the work that could have been better, because the best companies in the world do standardisation brilliantly.
Yeah, what a brilliant question. First of all, I'd put on the record that a lot of the work in standardisation is exceptional, isn't it? I mean, there is a lot of great work that was done. I've only managed a factory once in my career. When I ran Westinghouse, we had a factory at Chippenham, and I was always so impressed by production engineering. And they put a lot of effort, a lot of the value of design went into productionization. I mean, for me, it's one of the biggest missed opportunities in Crossrail. There's hardly any modularity to it. In the Laing O'Rourke did some, the HV risers went in, the platforms went in at Liverpool Street, but there were so many opportunities. I fundamentally think, controversial thing, just my view, I'll write it in the legacy paper for you, Simon, I don't think the packaging was right on Crossrail. Giving it to tier one contractors, we should have done what MTR do, which is MTR do all the M&E assets longitudinally. So M&E would have become like the catenary or the signalling system. And I think if we'd done that, you clearly would have massively increased the client-side design. And then we would have spent a bit more time in design, and then the tier ones would have been told what to do. I mean, anybody work in Paddington here? Any Paddington people? I really, Paddington's the one that I always think we changed lots of the wiring in Paddington after the fact. In Canary Wharf, we've retrofitted the whole thing. So I think the packaging of Crossrail, the tier ones had such a terrible challenge, Simon, with design. We were going for Rebus Stage D, I think, at some point. I don't think it was approval. We should have said, right, M&E is pretty much like the catenary or the track, and everybody else is going to have to build around it. And we should have said in the M&E, this is the modularisation. Other thing that went wrong in modularisation was the operator was RFL were just too not influential enough in the process. Not their fault, but the rule book wasn't really fully established. So we've ended up with some very obscure rules and segregation between London Underground and RFL. I might even go even more controversial and say that Network Rail should have been the infrastructure manager. Because if NR had been the infrastructure manager, we might have avoided a lot, and we could have taken a lot of NR technology into it. Lots of lessons for Crossrail 2. Who's up for Crossrail 2? Anybody? But yeah, isn't it a shame we're not rolling onto Crossrail 2? Isn't it a terrible tragedy that for a small amount of investment, small numbers of hundreds of millions, but Crossrail 2 is ready to go. It's ready to go. And imagine if you took the team like your good self now into Crossrail 2 and set it up right. But unfortunately, in 10 years' time, somebody's going to have to relearn it all again. It's a real tragedy, though. Wouldn't happen in Australia.
Thank you, Mark. Next.
Hi there. Well, firstly, thank you very much for such a transparent presentation. I liked the whole storytelling throughout. It was quite inspiring. I think the question I want to ask is more around the governance structure. So you mentioned that it was a sort of 50-50 joint venture between the government and that of London. And what I found most interesting is that you thought that was the right structure. So I suppose when I compare it to other major projects, like perhaps what we have with the aircraft carrier, the Elizabeth aircraft carrier, they went for more of a contractual structure where it was much more of an alliance.
Yeah.
And when you talk around one of the major problems that you had was this integrated schedule about getting the right information from your supply chain and from everyone that was involved in the project. I think perhaps maybe an alliance would have been more suited. So obviously I come...
Yeah, good. I mean, I'm chairing I'm still a bit in railways. I chair the Transpennine route upgrade, and Neil Holm is running that, and he finished one of the final carriers, and he's explained to me how the alliance went. I mean, the other alternate model you could have had simply no sponsorship and put the delivery authority straight in TfL or the government, and in Australia, certainly in Australia, these projects are generally done by no separate authority, just within the department, even if it is multiple funding sources. What do I think? I mean, I would think Simon would know better than me. I think in 2008, this was extraordinarily large. And you can't understand in 2007, 2008 how big this thing was. And I think there was an attitude that you had to have a delivery authority to be independent, to attract the talent. I mean, fundamentally, it takes a lot of money and freedom. So I think the strength of this governance structure is the Crossrail board had a lot of autonomy. They could recruit at the right salary level. They attracted the best in the world. They had flexibility and agility. The problem is they got too independent. I think we'd all kind of recognize that now. I actually like the structure. The thing I would have changed in the structure would have been the sponsorship team, who were excellent. They should have had maybe more weight and power and influence over the delivery authority. I think if you try to create a government department to do this, I mean, you'd get a lot of trouble, because naturally in government and local authority, it's not easy to pay people the market rate. If you're a program director working in these projects is a £300,000 to £400,000 a year job. And if you don't pay them that, they'll go and work in Hong Kong or they'll work in Australia. It's a competitive global market. I think that's quite an influential debate. So I think the structure was kind of all right, but the board, the Crossrail Limited, became just too independent. TV documentaries, the greatest program in the world, till it wasn't. And I guess I was part of it. You get swept up in it. I think if we did it again, I think how HS2 are doing it, I think Mark Thurston's doing a wonderful job. He's not stuck with a singular end date. There's no kind of hubristic stuff going on with HS2. I actually think HS2 is doing a good job. Just my view, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Got time for a couple more questions. Natcha, over there in front of you.
Hi. So you talked. You mentioned in your talk kind of thinking about this as a systematic failure, where there were failures. And it seems, so you mentioned that being 20% over budget put Crossrail in the kind of top 3 of underestimated
winning.
So with it seems then that there's a systematic failure across engineering in terms of budget estimates and end date estimates. Is that a problem? What's the solution?
Well, I think, good question, that. 2 things. Firstly, the reality that generally for governments to back things, you have to trim. You have to be trimmed, yeah. So generally, these programs get trimmed too much. So the classic value engineering. Who's ever done a value engineering exercise? And what you find in value engineering is people start taking away the low-hanging fruit. In Crossrail, you'll remind me, Simon, we removed the intermediate shafts in quite a long, which was a bad mistake. Good laugh from the back there. What we should have been in the business of is risk reduction, you know. And now that's a different mindset. So I think fundamentally, instead of value engineering to get to a target, it's about risk reduction. And in that risk reduction, Treasury's holding the balance, the downside risk. I think Crossrail started in, 2006, 2007. Crossrail might have been a £17 billion project. It got trimmed. And what should have happened was that trimming should have been risk reduction, 2 signaling systems instead of 3. Don't take the widgets out. But the gap should have been retained by Treasury functions as a downside risk in the portfolio. And that's happening now, actually. You know, you go to HS2, I think in Treasury now, they are holding sort of pools of downside risk rather than just backing it. That's one. And the other one is what we talked about. Modularity is all. Modularity is all. Build these things in factories, ship them to site and plug them in. Sounds easy, but it is really the solution. Because if you modularize, you simplify, and you remove the influence of human beings, fundamentally. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, Ben Fly, if anyone wants to read on this, I've just repeated like a Ben Flyberg thing from Oxford. So Ben Flyberg of Oxford, Google him, have a read. There's some very interesting stuff about how modularity will save the world of mega programs.
Any more questions? Right. Done a good job, Mark. No more questions, even with people who are prolific in questions.
Good.
Thank you very much for your time, Mark, and I hope you'll agree. He's given us an honest and fascinating account of his experience and lessons learned from the delivery of what was the biggest infrastructure program in Europe. And out of curiosity, what's currently the biggest?
HS2.
HS2.
HS2 is spending 100 million a week. Crossrail peaked at about 30 or 40 million a week. HS2 is spending 100 million a week. So HS2 is 2.5 times bigger than Crossrail. Second one is the Grand Rapide of Paris. So so HS2 is a really brilliant project, but they're consuming some resource. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. And I'd like now to ask Ed Almond. Ed, are you here? To offer our vote of thanks to Mark.
Any moment now. Great. Thank you very much. So first of all, just to say, again, another really warm welcome to the IET at the Home of Engineering here in Savoy Place. It is fantastic to see so many people turn out for this event, because it's, frankly, my experience has been today. It's not been easy to get here, but it's been really worthwhile to hear about this fantastic project. Before I just come on to thanking Mark, I'd also like actually to thank our volunteers in the London local network. So what we've witnessed here today is just one of many activities that the team put together. These are all volunteer members putting their time to one side to support the work of the IET. And it was really interesting, actually, Mark's comment about the importance of purpose in any engineering product and project. And as you know, IET is a not-for-profit. We're a membership organisation, 155,000 member engineers, 4,000 volunteers amongst them. And our purpose is to engineer a better world. And that's something as an organisation we live and breathe every day. And that runs right through from trying to inspire young people to consider a career in engineering. And this is really important in terms of inclusivity and diversity. So many kids get put off an engineering career before they ever get a chance to consider it. Parents, schools, a lack of sort of engineering education and knowledge out there in our school system. And we take our support and our work as an organisation all the way through accrediting the degrees in engineering, supporting young engineers early in their career, We're looking to roll out a mentoring scheme soon to support some of that work, and the opportunity for people to qualify, demonstrate their professionalism, their commitment to ethics as members of the organisation. I always think the London Local Network has a relatively easy job in finding topics, because we've just talked about one of the great engineering wonders of the world, if you like, which is almost literally behind our feet. I think it's actually probably about half a mile north of here.
500 metres.
Ish. And in fact, this building itself went up very shortly after the construction of the embankment, which is just in front of this building. And the Thames used to lap up actually to Somerset House, which is adjacent to us. And of course, Bazalgette put in a great engineering project to support the management of drainage and effluent in London. And underneath the embankment, of course, there are other great tunnels put in the Victorian era, which are still in use today. And I'm sure it's going to be the case, as you say, that people will look back in decades and probably centuries to come and recognise the Elizabeth line as one of those great moments in engineering. I was really fascinated by some of the numbers in Mark's talk. So not just the sort of the 20 billion, but the 75,000 people who came together as a team to make this happen, as a single team ultimately, to make it happen. And of course, worryingly, the 75,000 apparently unprogrammed activities. And perhaps most importantly, we learnt how many purple corgis it takes to build a railway. So without further ado, Mark, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of everyone at the IET. It's been a really, really insightful lecture. I think it's been very accessible for all of us, and just that openness about the lessons learned, the importance of continuous improvement for the engineering profession. And as you say, the engineering profession has never been more important for the future of the world. So these really big, complex, interdisciplinary projects are going to become so important to the future of the world. And we do have to learn these lessons. We do have to pick up pace, and we do have to get things right if we're really going to make the world a better place to live in. So with that, Mark, thank you very much, and let's give Mark another round of applause. That's really great.
Oh, did you enjoy it?
Yeah,
Oh,
fantastic. I've learned a lot.
I've recorded there's 275,000, so I've remembered that.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Mark. I've got some announcements just before everybody leaves. Our next event here, and the last for the year, is our Friday lunch lecture. Completely different. It's about wearable electronics. It starts at 2 o'clock, and those of you who wish to attend can opt to join the lunch as well. If you register for a modest fee, it starts at 2 o'clock. And the next Wednesday evening lecture is on the 11th of January on the topic of building a quantum computer using silicon chips. And finally, a reminder for the drinks for those who are joining us upstairs, and the rest of you have a safe journey home. Thank you.